Hello again. Welcome to Lecture 3 where I'm going to talk about marketing segmentation and service positioning. Now, this is particularly challenging, as you would have heard, that services, of course, are intangible, they're variable, they're perishable, there's inseparability, so it relies on the interaction with people have with the service providers. Nevertheless, there are a few steps similar to what you've come across in product marketing of which we can do in services marketing with some, of course, subtle differences. The first step is to identify how to segment the market. Traditional approaches are demographic segmentations. Demographics, of course, are easily available from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and Census. However, demographics don't tell you why people make decisions. They might give you an idea of where the market is, but not necessarily decision making. Values and lifestyle segmentation, where we'll look at a very popular one in Australia called the Roy Morgan's values segments, are particularly useful, have been found particularly useful for service and image-based products. This is because these reflect your personality in the marketplace and how you might want to engage with the service provider. And we'll have a look at that, an example of that shortly. Behavioural segmentation has been found to be the most stable and I suppose actionable part of segmentation, and this includes things like benefits, usage situation. Here's an example of what we mean by activities and interests or related to lifestyles and values. And so these values here can represent really what we call psychographics, or your behaviour which relates to, or your personality that relates to market-based behaviour. Now, the Roy Morgan value segments is an attempt to come up with a overall schema, if you like, of segmenting across a number of product and service categories. Generally, it's a good idea to segment your market according to a category. Nevertheless, there are examples out there in the marketplace that use across segment approaches. And so here is the Roy Morgan's values segmentation, and you can see that there are two main dimensions here. Life satisfaction, individualism, and quality goes this way, and price expectations, innovation, and progressiveness goes this way. Time prevents me going through each of these segments, but let's have a look at one particular segment, young optimism, and how it relates to services marketing. Okay, so these people are put in this category according to answering a series of questions about their lifestyle. And compared to other people in this segmentation, these people are more likely to be amongst young, they're into image and style, they're more optimistic, hence the name. They're more likely to be innovative, risk-taking, developing an international perspective, and I guess being experiential in the services that they acquire. How do we know then if we've got some good segments? Let's say we decide to go for the young optimism segment with mobile phones. Well, a couple of things we look at. Firstly, segment size. Now, size isn't just number of people. Really, size is in terms of the value of the segment. Is the segment growing or not? A clue to this might be if we looked at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the census, and looked at whether those young groups were actually growing as fast as the agement groups. The structure of the segment is also important. There may be more than one segments in here as well. And it's got to match our business objective and resources. So it's very hard to appeal to a young optimistic and a traditional family market at the same time. And so organisations need to make a choice over which markets they can serve best. Other factors in I guess assessing segments are, can we measure it? And you need to know the volume and purchasing power of those various market segments, and to determine the profitability of each segment before you go to the expense of developing a positioning strategy. Can you reach and serve that market? Do you have access to media? Young optimistic people, of course, are more likely to use social media. Do you have a social media policy? Are you well known in social media? If the costs exceed the benefits of some segments, may not be financially viable to continue to market to these segments, a decision that banks unfortunately make. Other segments sustainable enough to remain profitable. So we look here at the rate of growth to warrant this organisation being tailored to that segment. So we know in higher education at the moment, for example, that the undergraduate part of the market is not growing, but the international and mature age segment still shows signs of growth. And so for these larger segments, there may be a need to market to them. Here's an example rather of where organisations get it wrong. This is a poor choice of positioning. The caption reads "Seamen Wanted." P&O back in 2007, who were the cheap, I suppose, fun ship line of Carnival Cruises. Of course, this then alienated a lot of traditional markets. It also can alienate the younger markets because obviously it's quite a sexist campaign. So just an example there to let you know that organisations don't always get it right. So the other next thing is we look for segments which are distinctive if we can. We don't want to be everything to everybody. So think about service providers such as Apple to a large extent, or if we look at service providers such as compare Apple to Google or to Facebook or to Instagram. Instagram probably has a more distinctive market segment than the other ones I mentioned. Now, the three market coverage: mass undifferentiated marketing, where an organisation may do this to reduce costs because you've got the same offering for everybody. Differentiated marketing, so we might try and position ourselves away from the competition by providing something of benefit to the consumer. An example of that might be Virgin's positioning against Qantas, more on the idea of, I suppose, fun and customer service. Niche concentrated marketing is when we might look at a particular market segment, for example, luxury hotels, or we might look at budget backpacker hostels, and we just concentrate on that market. Of course, some firms will, which are large enough, have products and services across those markets. So Carnival Cruises, of course, have a number of lines from the more cheaper P&O singles market through to the more family, through to retirees, which I think is the Sea Princess line. The next step is to position your service. It's a really important area because you're starting now to look at your relationship between the service you're providing and the market you're providing it to. You can't please all of the people all the time. Positioning is also useful for us because it may identify market opportunities. And we'll have a look at some examples in a minute of that. And of course, if we're going to design our marketing mix, we need to have some idea. So positioning is how we appeal to the consumer over our competition. Here's an example of, I suppose, hotel brands and how they appeal to different markets. So up the top here, we've got international brands, Sofitel, upscale, Pullman. We have some regional brands such as Siebel over here, some mid-scale brands such as Mercure, and down here we've got some more economy brands. And so if we go through and we think about each of these hotel chains, each of these have used positioning to look at their relationship between the service they provide the markets. They're identifying market opportunities. So up here it's obviously margin, down here it might be volume. And of course, they've altered their marketing mix as part of that for a particular market segment. Some important characteristics then of positioning services. Well, you need to do something different, or you need to stand out that people will not make a decision over price. The diagram below shows you some organisations, some service brands, which have, I suppose, provided or differentiated themselves in various ways. It also should say who you're offering it to and whom. Are you an upmarket brand? Are you a new disruptive brand down here? Are you a traditional service brand? Are you a hybrid of products and services? Or are you a provider moving to a service type delivery model? It's useful for consumers. Brands and good positioning strategies makes choices a lot easier for consumers to make. And if they can make those choices easier, it makes it much easier for us to deliver the service. In developing a service positioning strategy, the first step is really to look at potential consumer demand and seasonality. You then actually have to look inside the organisation to see if we have the capabilities, the resources, including the expertise to deliver these services. IBM, on the previous slide, clearly has expertise in systems and in computer technology. And it's now moving more towards developing services such as cloud-based computing and consultancy. That means it has to change its expertise. You then have to look at the competitive analysis of whether you can compete with those brands. So can we set up a traditional service brand in the hotel chain? Or might it be better to just acquire a service brand? The other aspects of service positioning are to do with branding. The service provider must try to establish the services positioned in the consumer's mind. That is, that it has a distinctive position. IONET down the bottom here, who are a broadband provider in Australia, have gone a long way in providing a unique position, being the leading challenger, being the new kid on the block, providing good quality service. So proudly, they're now saying that they are the new number 2. Also, the brand, as you can see, is being positioned clearly against competitors' brands in this case here. Okay. Now, we can also position a service via its attributes, and this can include service-related features, and these might be things like, I suppose, things like if you want to think about a broadband plan, it's probably a bit more straightforward in terms of speed, data, downloads, but also customer service, responsiveness of customer service. If we think about the hotel or think about flying first class versus economy, there are probably a number of service attributes and features you might think of here. Again, IONET is using this approach of service-related attributes and again, knowing that the market is not that, people don't see the broadband market as being that fast in Australia, and really humorously playing off that they can offer a solution to this. The usage and user imagery, which is also shown in this advertisement, here we can position according to the user's personality, their lifestyle that we talked about earlier, and IONET, through some of the campaigns, you might argue, does that as well. We can also position via service benefits, functional needs, which again is reflected in the above advertisement, but also symbolic needs for self-enhancement, group identification and belongingness. If we're looking at the tourism market, if we're looking at education, if we're looking at something like retirement, if we're looking at even things like mobile phone communications, these kinds of symbolic needs are also important and may be used to position services. Experiential needs for services that provide sensory pleasures, variety, in some cases cognitive stimulation. If we look at the New Zealand campaign of how 100% pure, of how that really does, how New Zealand markets themselves not only to those kinds, to that appeal, but also to the sense of excitement in some of the extreme sports and activities you can do in New Zealand. And so experiential needs are also another way of positioning via service benefits. Now, positioning maps can also be used to do that. Now, what are positioning maps? Really, positioning maps use a number of comparisons. We might just simply ask how these hotels are the same or different, and based on comparing all those pairs, we come up with a positioning statement. Here is a perceptual map of luxury hotels in Singapore, and you can see the two major factors here are price and service quality. And the Swiss hotel is positioned, if you like, as a value for money luxury hotel. Okay, the Raffles, of course, is seen as the highest quality, well, not that much more, but is significantly more expensive. So an organisation can work out how it's positioned for the consumer. We can also plot people on this market as well by asking which hotel they most relate to. And so we can get an idea of how products are positioned competitively for consumers. Okay, so that's a few examples. Here's an example of a mobile phone provider, a niche mobile phone provider in Mason, and how they position themselves in the telecommunications market in Australia.
Amazing stories. Go Amazing Unlimited for $39.90 a month. Get unlimited standard talk and text Australia-wide. No locking contracts. BYO Mobile. Amazing. It's your call.
Okay, you can also see that at the end there, some of the approaches or distribution outlets they've used. So that's clearly a positioning based on functional benefits and something, I guess, also to do with the user experience. Now that's it for now. Again, this is really a summary. You can't learn everything from this lecture, but see your textbook and online topics for more information regarding what I've talked about today. And thank you for your time.